Hello and welcome to Auto Shenanigans. How the devil are you? Have you had a good week? My name is John. Thank you very much for joining me for another exciting Great British Road journey. This week we're staying in Norfolk and travelling from Kings Lynn down to Thetford, and as always I've got my Michelin 1923 guide to help us along the way, so let's begin. Kings Lynn is a traditional fishing port and market town that for centuries saw success due to its close proximity to the River Ouse and therefore access to main shipping routes. In the 17th century, a vast area known as the Fens was drained, creating a large expanse of farmland suitable for crop growing, and Kings Lynn was perfectly positioned to take advantage of this. A guy called John Atkins certainly did take advantage of that, becoming very wealthy in the process, and he ended up being mayor of Kings Lynn twice. In 1605, he would build Atkins Mansion, a wonderful timber frame structure that still survives to this day. This isn't it, I couldn't get a shot of me standing in front of it. Atkins Mansion changed ownership several times over the years, and in 1796 it would open as a pub and was renamed as the Greenland Fishery Inn. Now that name is relevant to us because according to my 1923 guidebook, one of the things you should do whilst you're in Kings Lynn is pay a visit to the Greenland Fishery Museum, which is found within Atkins Mansion. Whilst the building still survives, the museum does not. The structure was rescued from abandonment in 1912, at which point parts of the building were turned into the Greenland Fishery Museum. Apparently, the museum displayed paintings, agricultural implements, old tools and whale bones, but it were closed in 1932, so we're a little bit late. Today, the building is rented out as living and office space. As we leave Kings Lynn behind, we're presented with the Hardwick roundabout. In 1923, this was merely a fork in the road where we'd have turned right onto the A10, but things would all change in the 1970s with the construction of the A47 or the Kings Lynn Southern Bypass. When it was first built, the bypass terminated here, but if we take a look at some old satellite images, we can see where space was left for some additional carriageways and a flyover, suggesting more was to come. Yeah, kind of. The original plan was to continue the bypass over the roundabout on a flyover, connecting up with the A47 on the other side. The earthworks were put in place in preparation, but they didn't build it and they ignored the problem, hoping it would just go away. 30 years later, and it was decided to build half of the flyover and put in another roundabout, making the flyover completely useless. But of course, none of that existed in the 1920s, so let's pretend we've just done a right onto the A10 where we'll head south, and not long after we're going to make a stop in Westwinch to look at something that I thought was quite interesting. Indeed, this is an abandoned road. According to the old 1920s maps, it used to be the original route of the A10. In later years it's been shunted over a bit because the traffic can be quite excessive on this road, so it makes sense to move it all away from people's doorsteps. A small section of the original A10 is still in use for access, demonstrating how close it used to run by people's houses. As for this section, it's now decaying away, occasionally seeing use as a footpath. When we reach Stoke Ferry, we need to do a right turn onto Lynn Road to maintain the original route of the road. In 1985, Stoke Ferry was bypassed because back then the A134 was a popular route for commercial traffic looking to access Felixstowe docks, and it was preferred to send this traffic around the tiny village. Despite its small size, Stoke Ferry does get a mention in my 1923 guidebook, although what's funny is that the pubs and hotels it recommends are situated in towns nearby. In fact, it makes no mention of anything interesting at all. That said, driving through the village and I noticed this rather large agricultural factory of sorts. It produces animal feed and has done so for about 50 years, and it's one of 5 mills owned by a company who are headquartered in Edinburgh. At Cranage, I decided to turn off the main road for a moment because I wanted to come and look at a field. You'll notice on satellite images the outlines of buildings, and in the 1930s this field was known as Cranage Labour Camp. There were 4 of these labour camps set up across Norfolk, although they weren't unique to the county. Back then, if you were unemployed and claiming benefits, it was decided that if you wanted to continue doing so, you had to go and work in one of these labour camps. Because Cranage is located next to Thetford Forest, the sort of work they'd undertake was management of the forest, which no doubt involved a lot of hand pruning. If you didn't comply, no problem, but you got no benefits or housing. The camp would be taken over by the military once 1939 rolled around, with most of the workforce being sent off to work on the front line. The RAF f***ing love Norfolk. Can't see shit. There it is. As we progress further towards Thetford, we drive through Thetford Forest in all its glory. It's a lovely drive through a forest that covers an area of around 47,000 acres. What I find interesting is that it isn't some sort of ancient woodland and was installed, for want of a better word, in the early 1920s, and indeed it doesn't seem to get a mention in my guidebook. On the other side of Linford lies Grimes Graves, a prehistoric flint mine that's believed to date back to around 2500 BC. The mine covers an area of around 91 acres and has been designated as a scheduled monument to keep keep the remains of the mine as intact and original as possible. Today the landscape is bumpy and hilly and almost lunar-like because once upon a time there would have been hundreds of shafts and spoil piles all made by people looking to mine flint. Interestingly, you can visit the mine and take a trip down one of the shafts that's been restored, and I believe it's the only place in the UK that offers this experience, or you could just look at the photo on Wiki. As we continue through the forest, you might spot a chimney poking out above the treetops. It belongs to Europe's largest biomass power station. Actually, that's not accurate. It belongs to Europe's largest biomass power station that burns chicken shit. And when you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. Norfolk and Suffolk are heavily involved in the poultry industry, so they produce an awful lot of chicken crap. Turns out we can burn it and power our homes. The power station was built in the 1990s on the site of a former manure works. I can only assume they used to make fertilizers or something. Interestingly, despite the power station claiming to be good for the environment, it's the second largest emitter of CO2 in the county, banging out over 427,000 tonnes of CO2 a year. But that's nothing when compared to RWE's gas-powered station in Great Yarmouth that achieves 885,000 tonnes a year. But that's not the punchline. Oh no. If we work this out on a CO2 emitted per megawatt generated basis, the gas power station emits 2,107.14 tonnes of CO2 per megawatt. The good for the environment biomass power station emits more than 4 times that at 9,660.63 tonnes of CO2 per megawatt. I'd love to save the environment, but we're not going to do it with this shite. But don't worry though, the solution is to do your weekly recycling and buy an electric car. As we head into Thetford, our journey is interrupted somewhat by the A11 that when my guidebook was printed didn't exist. At the time, the A11 ran through the middle of Thetford a bit like this. However, other than the odd roundabout, the route into Thetford seems to be in line with the roads of yesteryear. What does our guidebook suggest we do in Thetford? It suggests we visit Thetford Priory, a medieval monastery built in around 1107. It took 7 years to build and has a very convoluted and boring history that I'll be skipping over completely. In 1540 it closed, with parts of the site remaining occupied, but the majority of it falling into a state of disrepair. By 1820 it was nothing more than a ruin, which it still is. No longer a ruin and now just an empty space is the site of the former Thetford Bridge railway station. It opened in 1875 on a line that connected Thetford to Bury St Edmunds, but after only a few years the operations were taken over by another train operating company who instead decided to run trains directly into Thetford station bypassing Thetford Bridge. They closed in 1953, but the original station building remained in place for many years, having only been demolished in the mid-2000s, and interestingly the A1066 that heads north from here follows the course of the old railway. Our last stop for the day comes from the guidebook and it's noted down as Castle Hill. Now I can confirm that there is a hill upon which used to sit a castle. The hill or motte was built on top of an Iron Age hill fort thought to date back to around 500 BC, and following the Norman invasion of the 11th century, a timber fortification was constructed on the site to defend against any further invasions. By the 12th century, the castle had fallen into a state of disuse, and as the years followed, the original structures were removed. It's a great place to get a view of Thetford if that's something you really want, and it's where we'll be ending today's road journey. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, there is of course a button specifically for that, and if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. That'd be wicked sweet awesome. Enjoy the rest of your week, whatever it is you get up to. My name's John, you've been watching Auto Shenanigans, and I'll see you guys next time for another exciting episode of Great British Road Journeys. Until then, take care, bye bye.